So I'd like to introduce David Mann, Chief of the Division of Traffic Operations with Caltrans. Take it away, David.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me here. And I'm just going to talk quickly about some of our truck parking efforts as California is ramping that up in partnership with TxDOT and others on I-10 and also WashDOT and Oregon. So next slide, please. All right, I'm not going to go into the truck parking discussion, but I think the need is apparent. With freight coming into California and along the whole West Coast, obviously we want to ensure the safety of truck drivers and have a safe area for them to take their break. And as you see on the left, absolutely, we're struggling in that area to provide those opportunities in either public or private lots. So that's definitely something that we want to improve the planning and coordination amongst everybody. As a result, the three West Coast states got together and work together on a program. And obviously, at some point, a couple of years ago, we're able to develop infogrant to help fund this initial implementation. And you can see on the right, this is our initial plan as of today. We're targeting about 40 park and ride lots or roadside rest areas to provide truck parking information along I-5. Next slide. And just as a background, this project is currently in an early design phase. We recently were awarded the grant. So over the next couple of years, we will do PS&E and get through environmental. And hopefully, if everything goes right, we'll be in operations by the end of 2027. Our initial funding plans, this project could be around $21 million across the three states. And today's next slide, please. And it's really what I want to talk about today is how truck parking, looking at this as a case study, is bringing in some new questions for us here at Caltrans, and how this is feeding into our national conversations about roadway digital infrastructure, long-term O&M. So one of the things that we've, in my team has started talking about is statewide consistency in the unified user experience. Now that California has two truck parking corridors, one on I-10 and one I-5, we want to make sure that we have a unified experience for truckers that are going along those routes. Also, we want to try to deliver them in the same manner. Caltrans is a large DOT. We have 12 regions. And the delivery of projects actually doesn't come out of headquarters where I'm currently at, but they're actually done at the districts. So that presents another challenge when you're looking at an integrated system. And how do you make sure the delivery teams develop that in a way and procure it and construct it in a way that we get an actual integrated system at the end of this? And that's something that we're definitely looking at, and it's bringing up certain issues within our department to evaluate. Also governance. There's a lot of new technologies in truck parking, and roadside rest areas are not within the purview of, say, traffic operations program. So there's some ownership and roles and responsibilities that we're working through. And we also need to understand the roles and responsibilities with our fellow states. And I think the previous speakers have talked about how do we coordinate these joint efforts and who's really ultimately responsible for some of the interfaces and systems and challenges for something that goes across state lines. Another big item that's come up here in California is PII. Obviously, that now that we're trying to understand who's in our facilities, maybe using certain technologies that may capture information, we are making sure that we address that. And then liability as well. How do we share that liability? If we posted some information that may not be correct, or we estimate or predict incorrectly, and we just disseminate that to the public, that information may go up beyond state lines. What is the responsibility to the state that's producing some of that information? I think those are things that we definitely look at. And I think what Director Larkins talked about for the I-80 summits also would potentially be a good discussion for him for those items. Also, we were trying to bring up the performance in TSMO, for these types of systems. What is the expected uptime? How granular the information that we were providing? How many times we're updating the frequency of updates that we have? And of course, the metrics. What is success for us for truck parking and then overall roadway digital infrastructure focused projects? And then lastly, another discussion that we're having internally is maintenance and asset management. To us, this is actually a new asset class. So we need to think about the life cycle, the long-term costs, and then also configuration management. How do we ensure that any upgrades or changes that we make in a particular area ripple down through the rest of the system or the rest of the entire corridor across multiple states. I think that's going to be one of the key areas in roadway digital infrastructure that we really need to talk about, and really think about how systems that or have multiple owners make sure that they are still in sync as we go through our day-to-day operations. Next slide, please. From a technology standpoint, these are some other conversations we're having as well. Open and closed architectures, that's a big discussion, and we can actually spend a whole day talking about that. But that's something, once again, that we need to think about within a state. And then, of course, how do we work with the other states to ensure that consistency in lowering our overhead costs? The architecture, too, as well. Roadway digital infrastructure discussions, there's a lot more data. There's a lot more processing. There's a lot more compute and exchange. Where is that going to be housed? Are we going to do that all out in the field and and then it's going to be distributed? Are we going to have a central system that manages that? How are we going to connect ATMSs or essential software application between states? All those things are really at the forefront that really are going to require some detailed conversation moving forward. Another item that we've talked about is interfaces. Even this role here about now that we have this information, we have the opportunity to disseminate how many spots are available. Should DOTs take on that burden as being the portal? Should we have our own application, or should we rely on the private sector to get that information out for us? So should we just be a data hub, or should we actually be that first line external communication portal for travelers? And that's a big conversation I think a lot of DOTs should have. Having our own applications, having our own mobile apps, it is pretty time intensive. They're resource intensive to ensure that those resources are available 24/7 to the public. This is more in the weeds. Detection systems too as well is something that we've had. I know it's having the conversations having nationally. Loops, cameras, radar, LiDAR, sensor fusion, all that. There's advantages, disadvantages of both, and the question is, should we do it the same way? And we're thinking about the different environments that we have. And these sensor systems also produce different types of data in different ways, and those are things that we need to bring together. And then lastly, at the very bottom, and I'll touch on that, is cybersecurity. I think that's something that the state is really raising our posture in now by adding more devices and having more systems out there and having more customers. We need to be aware of that, and I think that's something that is going to really drive a lot of our conversations here internally within California, but also probably within these coalitions along I-5. So these are conversations that we're having internally. We're hoping to have these with ODOT and WashDOT, our partners, and over the next couple of years as we deliver this project. But I'm really excited, as Director Larkin and others mentioned, that the states, we are starting to work together, and we're finding ways to exchange in opportunities. So that's excellent. So in closing, I really want to thank everybody for the time. I do want to highlight that here in the last slide, you can see that's our Quick Map mobile application. Caltrans has their own mobile app. We have our own traveler information portal. We're providing a lot of information there. And we're trying, and as I mentioned earlier about what's the California role or what the DOT role is, that's something that we need to think about. Yes, we have a robust app, but could maybe the private sector partners do better by taking our information and presenting that out there? So with that, thank you very much, and we look forward to future updates on what's going on in California.